Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. I'm honored to have my guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself. So why don't you tell folks who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Appreciations to you, Bobby, and all your followers and listeners and colleagues. My name is Joe Truss. I'm a longtime educator and school leader, and now I'm a racial equity coach and consultant, working with schools and districts, trying to break this cycle of oppression for our kids, for our adults, for our educators, trying to figure out how we bring about outcomes that suit us, that serve us, that serve our liberation.
100%. I was telling you, before we hit record, uh, I came in contact with your work. I was looking at what's going on. I want to say I was working in the beginning stages of working in Trenton, New Jersey, clearly on the other side of the United States. And, it is primarily, folks that look like us, primarily teachers that do not look like us, and a whole bunch of, and not to say that that's a one-to-one correlation, because sometimes folks that look like us have some unlearning to do as well. But I'm in the space of a lot of unlearning and figuring out that like the stuff that I had been trained to do as an educator wasn't necessarily serving our kids, and then feeling like, I don't know, like this shock and awe of, wait a minute, does nobody else see this? Am I alone in this? And so I happened to click on, I saw you on this Facebook Live with, there was Nathan Menard and the authors of Hacking School Discipline, talking
Mm-hmm.
through some restorative practices. And they were talking to you about white supremacy in schools. And I was listening to you and I was like, yo, I'm not crazy. Like, I'm not alone. Somebody else thinks this, sees this, and sees it for what it is. And it served as a very affirming moment where your words were like, you could have been talking to 1,000 people, but I felt like you were in front of me talking to me like this is what I needed to hear in the moment. And so I appreciate your work and what you do. Um, but I want to start off by asking you this, because you're doing a lot of consultancy work. You're doing a lot of work in schools. But when I first encountered you, you were still serving as a school leader
Yeah.
at the time. Um, Talk to me about that journey, man. Talk to me about serving in school leadership and kind of some of your experiences there as you are to the work that you're doing now.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll definitely hover on this point around who's crazy and are we crazy? Because I think that let's start there. One, you know, to be brown and be black in America is
Come
to
on, Doc.
always be entertaining this idea of like, maybe I am crazy. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I am crazy. No, wait a second. No, I'm not crazy. They're crazy and the system is crazy. I'm not crazy. But to be in this constant state of not of seeing some things but not being able to address it, right? And like even the piece of like getting to where we've gotten to, getting where you've gotten to, the amount of crazy that you've had to ingest,
Hmm.
process, regurgitate on command, do you know what I mean? At the right time to be able to advance on the chessboard, to move up these rungs in the ladder, start to make you crazy, right? And also start to have you question what the reality is, right? It's the existence of being forever gaslit. You know what I mean? Like perpetual, right? So we'll start there. So first I'll say, like, if you care about children, you're not crazy. Do you know what
Yeah,
I mean?
man.
If you
Yeah.
if you believe that children can do well and they're brilliant, you're not crazy. If you believe the black children are brilliant too, you're not crazy, right? If you believe that something's wrong with the system, you're not crazy, right? The system is set up to make us feel that way, so that at some point we accept the programming, right? To say, okay,
Hmm.
okay, I yield, right? I accept, I roll over. I'm just gonna continue this cycle of oppression, right? That's
Yeah.
that's the point of kind of what we move, the system that we move through, right? And the other metaphor I love to use is the Matrix, right? The Matrix reference is at some point you're like, damn, okay, I see some other pieces. I can see the glitches. I can see the code of what's going on here. I want to do something about it, but there's not enough other folks that either see it or acknowledge it. So what does that relate to being an educator and a principal, right? So I get to this role of being a principal in a school, and I get there coming with the hopes that all children can learn, then can
Mm-hmm.
succeed. I don't care. I grew up poor. I grew up in a studio apartment in the 1980s, battling all the kind of things I kind of battle. Right, and that's not to say that I can make it because of meritocracy. I'm saying I can make it because I have something inside of me, and these other children, all the rest of these children, they got something inside of them too. They got some barriers in front of them that we got to address. They got some holes in the curriculum that we got to address. We got some holes in the policy that we got to address, but they're capable, right? So if you believe that there's some problems to be addressed and they're possible to address them, you ain't crazy.
Mm-hmm.
The folks who say it's not possible, those folks are crazy. The folks that say that we can't do it, we don't have enough opportunity this year, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough time. Those are the folks that are crazy because they are being complicit in the process. Is it simple? Hell no, it's never simple. But if we can't acknowledge that the work needs to happen and we can't wait, that's craziness. That's insanity, right? So as a principal, I get in and I'm like, what can we do, right? And I'm trying to battle the craziness that we all carry inside of our mind of thinking that it ain't possible. We can't do it. Something's wrong with the kids.
Mm.
Um, so anyway, I get there and I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to wrestle the things I need to unlearn. Right? We were just talking about this piece of unlearning. I was trained to be a disciplinarian
That's it. Yep.
through K-12 and through like teacher education. Right? My check system. How many checks? You got 2 checks. You got 3 checks. Now you got a detention. Now you got double detention. Now you got a suspension. Now you got the classroom. Whatever. Right? I was trained to do that. So being a school leader, I'm both in the role of trying to do something different and having the possibility of pushing and learning and doing professional learning and all that. But we're all back. Trying to support folks to break out of the craziness, right? To choose the other pill in the matrix. Do you know what I mean? And that work is hard. It's hard doing that in general. It's hard doing that young. It's hard doing that being brown. It's hard doing that growing up poor and not and coming in with some slang and some references that everybody doesn't reference.
Yeah.
That's the hard part, right? And that's the part of like having to act a little crazy to do the process or whatever. It's hard to do, but I spent 6 years doing it and figured some things out and ran into a lot of pitfalls and roadblocks that I learned from that. I'm trying to do better now as I support folks.
The aspects of feeling like, yeah, it must be me. Like the system is gaslighting me. Uh, Other folks must not see it. Uh, on top of what I will say is what I'm gonna say is the loneliness or the call or the burden of leadership.
Yeah,
I imagine that there is uh, uh, some hills, some things to navigate as you are continuing to unlearn, continuing to unplug from the matrix and see, well, wait a minute, some folks actually like it here, even though I'm trying to lead a building out of it. Um, what what have been some of the lessons learned in that journey? What have been some of the hardships? Because, and the reason I say this, just to put deal my whole hand, is folks who are listening and are in, educators who are listening, they are in the midst of experiencing behaviors, experiencing inconsistencies and things within a system, and are clinging for hope, um, and are clinging for, I know I can't be the only one experiencing, thinking, doing these things. And I think mediums like this provide that space for people to take a deep breath and say, okay, wait a minute. Let me remind myself of what's true,
yeah,
even though I'm in the midst of all the crazy. So could you talk to us a little bit about that experience for us?
yeah. I mean, I think one, you brought up isolation, right? So
Yeah.
that when we are divided, we are easily conquered. When we are divided, it's easy to dehumanize us, right? And it's easy to gaslight everybody if it's always one on the system every time, right? If it's always a backdoor conversation behind closed doors, let's talk about it offline. Like it's easy to kind of manage the system, right? To smash the resistance from the bottom, right? This popular uprising. It's easy to do that. So the biggest piece is you can't be alone, right? So yes, as a leader, if let's say you come in and you got some agenda, some vision, or whatever, you'll never succeed alone. It don't matter, right? You can have the gospel in a book. You know what I mean? You can't do it solo, right? So then we
Yeah.
get into like you need some teams, right? But it can't be the old team though. It can't just be the team that was, because the team that was doing what they were doing.
Right.
So your team may not be the right team, right? Whether that's a leadership team or colleagues or a PLC, whatever that is, you got to build your people, build your base, so it's not going solo. So at least triangulate, to at least calibrate, to like co-regulate that I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're not crazy. So what can we do together, right? Then we get into community organizing and figuring out how we're going to flip a system, right? The other piece is we got to know what we're talking about, right? And a lot of times when we come in the system as educators of color, we've come in with 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, 5 decades of a study of sociology and racial equity in practice and navigating that stuff. So we got multiple doctorates in this work. Other folks aren't bringing that to the table. So when we come in and we're trying to have a conversation, I could be, I got a doctorate. I'm talking to somebody who's in kindergarten with their understanding of what's going on, their understanding of history, of their understanding of sociology, of their understanding of the present day. So there's some learning that has to happen, right? A good thing we got professional development. A good thing at least that's built into some of the time, right? Do we do the right thing with it all the time? No, but it's there. So now when we bring an idea of what do we do with that time to bring folks together and also do some learning together, so that we are building up our consciousness, building up our understanding of terminology and frameworks, and then building up our practices, then we can kind of start doing something different. So I say all that to say there's got to be some learning in that process. And there's got to be some community building, but not community on some like, let me just talk about your kids and your weekend. That's cool. You need that part too, but we need some community around what's at the core. What do you truly believe? Why do you believe that? What led you to believe that? And when the shit goes down, what direction are we going to go? When we say break, right? When we say hut, what play are we running?
That
Do you
part.
know what I mean? And when we don't have that, we going here, boom, we're going there, we're going there, and where we get at the end of the year, same place we were in the beginning, right? So
Yeah.
there needs to be a coordinated effort to that, right? And as a leader, you can come in and think you got the gospel, like I said, but that's not it. It's about co-constructing that, but with the right inputs, with the right ingredients to the conversation, so that we are working as a team to break the status quo.
The aspects of building of the team building, especially in any form of leadership, whether you're in the classroom, whether you are a teacher coach, whether you are at the district level, principal, whatever, wherever it is, those aspects of team building are hard, because one of the things I'm learning in here, this my first year in the AP seat, is leading is hard when you have to lead through others. When it's just you and you have a vision, you get to go and just execute. Well, I mean, sky's the limit. You can go ahead and just do. But when you have to create an aspirational identity with others, co-create, when you have to challenge and push others in areas that they don't want to be challenged or pushed,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when you have educators, particularly who, you know, Dr. Anthony Muhammad, when he was writing his book, Transforming School Culture, he talks about the fundamentalists, and they've gone through school. They've excelled at school as is. And so their understanding is, well, these kids need to excel in school as is and have not unplugged from the matrix because they've been successful in the matrix. And and for me, that has been part of the frustration. Like I know I'm walking in my purpose. I know this is where I'm supposed to be. Like I'm good. We're gonna keep moving. At the same time, it's like, man, do you not see that this could be so much better? Do you not see that this could be so different for all of us? And at the end of the day, I'm realizing some people, it's just like, nah, I don't see it because this worked for me.
Yes, I
And
mean,
that,
and that comes down to is right. Is it working? And if it worked for me, that's one answer. But the question is it working for everybody? And if it's not working for everybody, okay, then why is it not working for everybody? What's your answer to that? And if your answer is because the people it's not working for don't deserve it, aren't working hard enough, or are inferior, that's a different plan, but we need to get to the point where we can excavate that amount of analysis and that amount of like core belief system to say, now let's address that. Because if a person can say like, oh, you're right, it's not working for that group of students, for black students, for immigrant students, for newcomer students, then we can say, why is it not working for them, and what are we prepared or willing to do to change that, right? But we got to kind of move people through some steps, right, to kind of get to this place of, yeah, I do want to serve all kids, and I don't know how to get there, so what do we do next? But you're right. People got to see it first. And the truth is, like, we hide those stories, right? We hide our dirty laundry, right? We put our kids in special education in the basement, in the bungalows. We hide them. We put our we.
Mm,
I was at a school recently where they said, yeah, we used to have a program where the kids who didn't work, we put them like in this room, and that's the school they did all day. They didn't really go to regular school. It wasn't even a special ed program. They just said the kids that have behavioral programs, we go put them, and we've seen that in schools across the country in history, right? So we
yeah,
do that because then we can be like, it's not a real problem. It's not our problem. We got to deal with it. We don't need to change anything.
yeah, yeah. And when you can move and isolate a problem, right, and then become something else, then we'll feel levels of fabricated success.
Yeah,
We'll feel
most definitely.
yeah, we'll feel like we're making strides, but really all we did was move the disease, if you will, from part of our body to another, and it's never really been dealt with. Um, you talk, and I want to, you talk a lot about and tackle. You have a whole conference which I want to hear more about as well, tackling white supremacy culture in schools. But if I'm in the matrix, right? Like if I'm the educator that's like, wait a minute, what do you mean white supremacy culture? Like we just go, like these things work. We go to school, you sit down, you learn from a teacher, you get information, and you get tested on this information so that you can have a productive life. Like what do you mean white supremacy culture? Is this wokeism, sir? All these things that
don't
people.
don't make you define it real quick. We'll get that. Go circle on that. I mean, I think so. To answer your question, one, that's not a terminology that I created, right? So I'll first say that that term, at least as it's become popular these days, came from an
Right.
article from the early 2000s from Tim Oken and Kenneth Jones.
Yep.
But I will say, people of color have been talking about a culture of white supremacy since there's been white people in America. Okay,
100%.
right. So it's really just to say, is there a culture? Is there a dominant culture? What does the dominant culture say around about how we should be? Who's dominant, right? So white supremacy culture talks about whiteness, but there's a dominant culture of patriarchy as well, right?
Yeah.
There's a dominant culture of heteronormativity as well, right? So the question is, who's in the dominant position in society? What do they say about how we're supposed to be, how we're
Mhm.
supposed to act, what values we're supposed to hold, and what's the impact of those cultural traits, those beliefs, and what does it look like, right? So if we're gonna say one of those characteristics of white supremacy culture is individualism, then we can say, okay, people can say the U.S. is all about individualism and capitalism and meritocracy and rugged individualism. People write all day about that stuff. The question is, who is served by that characteristic and that value? That's what it comes down to, right? Because we can say anything about anything. The question is, if we hold that as a value, who's served by that value? Because if we say we're in a classroom and we say it's all every person for themselves, it's all about individualism, then it's some people will succeed and some people would not succeed. But we're also maintaining a certain culture that promotes individualism as opposed to building collaboration and collectivism and unity and community and empathy, all that stuff on the other side that's not about individualism, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're able to, and if people never can come together, then we can never have some conversation around common good, common welfare, solidarity, all that kind of stuff. And the people in power can be served by a concept of individualism, right? They can be in the
Hmm.
classroom. They can also say that life's about being individual, and I'm in my house right here, and I'll talk to my neighbor because we just do our own thing in this nuclear family right here. So if their house is burning and they're hurting over there, I'm not tripping off of them, right? And if I got money, I'm keeping my damn money, okay?
Mm.
Um, so it allows folks who are in power to stay in power. At least if we're talking about individualism, right? I mean, there's other characteristics, perfectionism, power hoarding. Back to if hoarding power is important, and I got the power, I get to keep the power. If white people have the power and power hoarding is supreme, then white people get to have the power. If men have the power and we say it's about hoarding power and not sharing power because we value hoarding power and making absolute decisions, then men get to keep the power.
Right, right, right.
Okay.
And these characteristics that serve, you know, those in power, they they're almost like, I heard an educator say one time, I think, oh no, it was actually my guest last week, Colin Seal of Think Law. He he said that it's almost like we need a green book for education where we can tell each other like, no, these are the schools where people actually care and they're actually doing work to unlearn and unplug and to promote the flourishing of everyone and not just some. And that was a sobering thought for me, right? Because, you know, and for context for those who are listening, Green Book, like, you know, basically these are the places where it's safe for marginalized identities to be in a place where they are loved, served, valued, and will flourish. And I hear that, and the sobering thing for me is I'd probably agree. Like right now, today, while I
Of
still
course.
fight
I
for
mean, think
what's
about it.
coming.
We do
Yeah,
this all the time. We're like, can I work there? Is it cool for me? What are they talking about there? What's the leader like? We ask those questions.
yeah,
Parents do that with schools. We do that within schools in a classroom. Like, who's that teacher? I don't want my kid to be in that class. Don't take that teacher, right? So we're always searching for places where we're going to be safe
yeah.
at a minimum, right? Let alone healed or built up or empowered. But the problem with that is that that's just us still navigating the system, trying to like navigate the minefield as opposed to overhaul the whole thing and make it right for everybody. It shouldn't, right? Your zip code shouldn't determine your outcomes. What school you go to shouldn't determine that. What teacher you get. I mean, none of those things should determine it, right? You should be able to have a whole experience wherever you go. But we don't have the capacity and the structures to do that, right? Which get into why the change is so necessary.
You talk about capacity, and I think about that in multiple lanes. We're talking economics, who has the finances necessary to be able to promote the things we're trying to see in schools. We're talking about skill building, those who actually have the knack, competency, know how to be able to teach with that level of understanding, of rigor, of all the things we talk about, right? And then, but then I also think about this layer of, uh, I forget where I read it, but it's not a question of whether or not we can. It's a question of whether or not we care enough to do. Is a quote that I read. So I guess my subsequent question would be: do you agree with that quote as it pertains to us actually getting our hands into getting like doing the work necessary to build that new normal we're talking about? And with that question is, if I'm a teacher who's, oh, wait a minute, maybe I should have taken the red pill. How do I begin to take that first step? Begin to unplug, begin to unlearn. What do I need to be doing?
I mean, one, you got to be in some sort of a community with some other folks, right? Because of being left to our own devices, all we got one brain there, right? So we need to be in a community that's about growth and about change, right? Because that's going to allow us to grow. It'd be nice to get that in a professional setting, in the spaces where I'm supposed to go every day. But if not, you got to go and get that somewhere else. Now, the hard part about this is that this message is mostly for white people because people of color find that community because we have to
Hmm.
to survive at a minimum, right?
Hmm.
And to advance to a certain extent as well, right? We need that community, right? The white folks need to find a new kind of community, right?
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
pushing them, right? For growth, right? Whether that is through conversation, through learning, through somatics, through healing, all that. They need all that stuff. Like I said, because we're talking about kindergarten versus doctorate level work, right?
Right. Right.
Um, but the issue there around do we care enough? Yes, right. Some people don't care because their freedom is not locked up with those people who are not free.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's quotes around that, right? I'm not going to pretend that's my quote, right? But until folks realize that, like, they got to be in it, they have to be shoulder to shoulder with that. They're not in that, right? That's critical race theory. That's interest convergence, all that, right? People write about that. The question is, once you do care enough, what are you going to do? The problem with our system is that even when you care and you're trying to do something else, the structures can be set up to override what you're trying to do. Case in
Yeah.
point, you could say, I want to teach a certain way and empower students and not over-identify students to put black students in special education.
Right.
But a system can be set up based on maybe the other five teachers or the administrator or somebody else, or one bad thing that kid does behaviorally, all of a sudden we're in an IEP, meaning now this kid got an IEP, doesn't necessarily need to have an IEP. That's a system thing, right? That's a process thing, right? So it's not always just about how much I care, although that's the individual piece. To get the individual in, these structures need to be blown up and rethought as well, whether that's around school placement, school funding, curricular
Mm-hmm.
decisions, right? All of that, right? You could care in Florida right now, but they said there's certain things you can't teach in Florida. Okay? Your caring
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily matter. It's not enough to stack up against that structure, right? Because some structures mm, are much larger to address.
Yeah. When folks gather in community to whether they're looking at a certain issue or just growing and learning together, typically we get into echo chambers rather than true community.
Mm.
And I say all the time, when we talk about community, I try to define it this way. I said, when I make your problem my problem, we're in community. And 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 for me, I mean that across so many different varying dynamics. I try as much as I can, imperfectly as it might be, to center and promote and to amplify the voices of Black women and to talk about, um, for them to be amplified in this space and try to do what I can in that way. And for me, it's essential because I feel like, like I said, a rising tide, helps every boat, right? And so if we don't center the voices on the margins, if we don't center the concerns of those on the margins, then I don't feel like we're doing real equitable work. In that process, though, becomes, we say all these things, become buzzwords. They're things we talk about all the time. You think back to the summer of 2020 and all the carnage that ensued over the summer of 2020 when people said, you know what, we need to really unplug ourselves from this matrix. We started book clubs and people formed book clubs and they started reading, and now we're in book bans 2 years later. And and when you look at that, you go, well, where is this supposed allyship? Where were people who were appalled at the death of George Floyd and Sandra Bland and you know um, and the list goes on, and you see that at least for some folks it feels like we go through this cycle of inactivity where we need a catalyst to then push us forward just to begin to identify it. And then we go through this cycle where then frustration builds up, we don't move forward, and then we need another catalyst again. How do we, with the work that you're doing, how can you tell, or what can you share with us that would help folks who are kind of running on that hamster wheel, feel like they're not moving forward because, again, it always comes back to another catalyst to get us to wake up and be like, oh, wait a minute, something does need to change. It isn't. It still is broken. We haven't fixed anything. Um, what what insight? What are your thoughts about how we can kind of get off that hamster wheel to begin to see progress?
I mean, one is that we can never assume that we're going deep enough,
Mm,
right? So, example, 2020 hits, and people had a reaction as to what they needed to do, how they needed to react, and how deep they needed to go
yeah,
to move forward. And they went to a certain depth. And that led to what they did and how long they wanted to stay engaged, like you said, right?
yeah,
Um, um, so we need to go deeper, right? Whether that's around personal excavation, reflection on our practices, right? The other piece is we can't assume that individual feelings and individual actions alone are going to be enough, right?
mm,
Because if we said, because if all we did was have great conversations and great book clubs 2020 till now, but the structures didn't change, How
Mm.
we react to students' behavior didn't change. How we assess students didn't change. Then we fall back on those structures that exist, right? And those structures can override our our strong feelings, our inactive, right? Weaker kind of things don't matter. Structure kind of takes over. I'm doing my job. This is the job. So when the time comes when people are activated enough, we need to ask for everything. We need to everything needs to change. Change this, change that, change that. So that way when we come back, we're now following a new system, new habits, new patterns. Then that way that
Right.
kind of takes over, right? For example, we got Title IX. There was a whole bunch of work that went through to get Title IX, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now there's certain ways that we are trained to respond to acts of sexism, patriarchy, homophobia, sexual harassment. However you feel about it, there's some law on that stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
necessarily have something on the books around race in the same way. Yeah, we got some amendments and whatnot, but not like that,
Yeah.
okay? Right?
Absolutely.
So the structure and the political, the policy piece matters so much because that's what sticks, right? The other piece is some people moved on and let go of that work. Everybody didn't. The
Yeah.
people who were activated before 2020, they're still activated today. Maybe they
Yeah.
changed careers. I don't know what they're doing, but they still care. The people
Yep.
who
Yep.
cared for a little bit and then left were people who were still, they were in first grade. Maybe 2020 brought them up to third grade. You know what I mean? And then they got off the bus, right? We need to keep that bus moving and give people some options for that. But it can't all just be opt in, right? It can't just be like maybe you sign up for the book club after work hours or whatever. At some point, it needs to be built into our professional plans.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear in your words is, this thing needs to be a part of how we show up and who we are. It can't be this extracurricular or this after work or this special committee that we form that has no real power to change anything, but we put it out there, right? It can't be, and so just to put out there, in the traditional sense of how schools and businesses and people move forward, there was a catalyst, aka, you know, um, they saw what happened with George Floyd and said, okay, we need to do something about it. They put out a statement. There was black boxes on the internet. There were anti-racist statements on their web pages, and they said, "This is who we need to be. We stand with, the black community and stand against these things." Blah blah blah. They put those statements out, and then they said, "Okay, wait a minute. We actually need something to spring. Like we actually need to do something if we're going to put out this statement." So then they form a committee. That committee starts meeting, and they start talking about the issues. And really, it's a lot of people joining in because it was it was the latest fad for some people. I won't say all people. For some people, it was a fad. There was something there. They joined in, and then the frustration builds. So then they bring in a consultant. They bring in somebody who's uh, not just equity passionate, but equity competent to try to help things. Then now they realize, okay, wait a minute. Beyond the training, something's got to happen. It's not happening. We get frustrated. So then nothing happens, and then we need another catalyst to start the process over again. And that's typically how it works out, at least in my experience. But from and this is me studying from afar, from clear across the nation, the work that I'm seeing you do with school leaders, with your coming conference and the one that was, for last year, and the work that I see you doing is helping people to move from that cycle of inactivity. It's helping people to actually see meaningful change and growth, because this stuff, we're not going to unlearn and undo these things in a year, 5 years, 10 years. Like it's going to take time. Can you talk to us about some of the successes, that you're seeing, some of the things that keep you motivated, like, yeah, we are on the right track, that keep you knowing that you're in this work for the right reasons and doing the right things?
Yeah, no doubt. Before I answer that question, I want to say this other thing around why we got stuck. It's not just we ran out of steam. We also hit resistance, and we didn't know what to do with the resistance.
That's good. Yeah, absolutely.
Both individuals and structural, right? We didn't know how to respond to resistance. And we didn't even know how to analyze the resistance we were getting. So all noise was just like, oh, we got to stop, noise. There's some noise, we got to stop. We weren't even able to parse out, is that white fragility noise? Is that white tears noise? Is that people lacking skill gap? They're really asking to build their capacity up, and that's why they're giving us noise. We just got to shut it down. So I didn't know what to do with that energy, right? Or maybe I had that and I had the power and I was gatekeeping. So I got in my feelings and I felt this kind of way and I felt inadequate about what I was doing and guilty and nervous and all that kind of stuff. So I shut it down. And we didn't know what to do with that institutionally. Right?
Yeah.
So it got
Yeah.
shut down state by state, and also generally. There's a general feel in any state you're in that maybe we went too far. That maybe I don't feel maybe we went too far, and I didn't feel maybe we didn't go that far before that, because I'm being guided by a different set of values, right? But people who are new to the party, they didn't necessarily know, right? So that segues into the answer a little bit of I like to support organizations and schools and leaders with what do you do with that? Because no matter what, this work is about change and change management, managing the change. Whether that is a new literacy policy process, whether you're going to do PBIS or SEL or restorative practices or regular, whatever that is, there's going to be a change process to that, and there's going to be some resistance. You got to know what you're doing with that resistance and that noise and those questions, right? Organizations need to know what to do with that. And part of that is individual too, to understand what's my trigger points and what activates me, what shuts me down, and what does my racial identity have to do with that? What does my positional authority have to do with that? And how do I mitigate all those things when it shows up so that I don't just shut it all down and fold and go back to the status quo? The things that give me hope is leaders, especially figuring out what to do with that kind of energy and talking it through, because like I'm one person, I led one school, but I can't be in all the schools. But trying to support leaders or teams in that school to figure out what their vision is and what they're going to do, not just with resistance, but what their goals are all around learning, that gives me hope. And then this recent year, I've been doing a lot of instructional focus work, because like theories and ideas, that's great. But in the end of the day, kids are in the classroom, maybe they're learning outside or whatever, but they're learning somewhere. And the question is, what is that learning space? What's that learning experience like? Are they learning, right? Are they engaged in what they're learning? Right? Are they having experiencing joy in what they're learning? Do we know? How do we know? And what do we do with what we see? Are we looking? Do we know what to look for? Right? As a school leader, I spend a lot of times doing something called instructional rounds. Right? You're supposed to go visit a school. It's not always your school. You pop into a school, you got a little clipboard, maybe you got a list of things you're looking for, and we're trying to see what does the learning look like to give that school some feedback around how they're doing. You could do this internally as well. We spent years, in my opinion, looking for the wrong things. Right? No Child Left Behind was like, go in there, look for the objective on the wall, go look for whether kids are on task or in task, go look for how many kids got pencils in their hands, go look for how far kids are slanting to the forward of the part of the board. Like, we were looking for the wrong thing. Go look at what paper they're on. Are they on page 79 of the textbook? Are they on 78? Right? We're looking for the wrong things. So what gives me hope is working with educators to know what we should be looking for, and then looking for that. Right? So if we start to identify what are anti-racist practices, and what does it look like to be engaged in deeper learning, engaged learning, reflective, responsive, relevant, all those terms, once we can define what that looks like, then we can decide, is it happening? Then we can answer the question of how do we get there, as opposed to, are we moving through the curriculum fast enough and are the kids passing the test? That's the wrong stuff. That's the wrong stuff we're looking for. That gives me hope, because then we're moving from theories. So like day to day, there's some kids in school right now, okay, and there's some kind of learning happening. What does that look like and who's being served?
I think two things. One is you're hitting a very just a needed point that I hope our audience is picking up, and that is we have to be looking for the right things, right? We have to be asking the right questions. Because if we fail to ask the right questions, then we're going to rely on antiquated or impartial or just failed systems to be able to determine if we are hitting the targets we're trying to hit, if we are moving things forward. I think about, you know, the so I say this, I'm a bit of a superhero nerd. I love Marvel, love DC, like that's just, my jam. And so I was thinking about, as you were talking, uh, it was the Avengers. Thanos had came and ripped everything up, and they had lost. And they're sitting with the fact that they're living in this world where half the people are gone. They don't know what to do.
Mm,
And Captain America is sitting there and he's talking to folks and he's like, "Listen, we got to make the best of what we have." He's almost had this defeatist type of outlook on things. I think I'm seeing, and this isn't, to paint with a broad brush here. I'm saying I think that there is a notion in which, because we haven't asked the right questions and because we're not necessarily measuring the right things, people have that same outlook. Well, we got to just make the best of what we got. This is just it. It's not going to change. The system, aka Thanos, has won, and there's nothing we can do.
mm,
Um, until the Avengers get together, they go back in time and say, no, we can recreate this thing. Now we can't go back in time, but we can create a new. We can restructure how we do things and think through things and challenge each other. um but it takes reflection, right? Like I think we overlook that. It takes like deep heart work of what am I bringing to the table and what are my expectations and what do I see in kids and what do I believe about kids and what do I believe about myself and education, and am I saying things like these kids can't, you know? Um, so assuming that I am that educator that is trying to be reflective and trying to do that deep, like start individually as we work collectively, what are some of those right questions that I should be asking myself as I navigate this new way forward? What should I be saying to myself and asking myself and engaging around?
I think if I'm an educator, a couple questions, right? One, what was my schooling experience like?
Yes, sir.
How much did I enjoy that? Now that I understand pedagogy, okay, what kind of pedagogy was being used during my K-12 and even university experience? What was that like? What was the impact of that? That gives us a wealth of knowledge and experience, right? To, to think about, because then you could be like, oh, right, that was not. I didn't have a good time. Then you can kind of now move to this question of what am I seeing now? What could be different, right? Um, Now back to some questions around the present day. What's the impact? It doesn't matter what my intention is. It don't matter what the curriculum. It don't matter what power standards were selected. It doesn't. Those things don't matter. The question is, what is the impact? What impact am I seeing on my day-to-day practices, right? Or the things that are decided for me, that roll downhill to me, the things that I choose to either perpetuate or not. What's the impact of those things? Now, if I can look at historical longitudinal data and know that there's certain kids that have not been served, are they still not being served? Am I still doing the same thing, right? I don't want to keep doing the same thing. Think I'm gonna get some different outcomes. So what can I change, right? And do really, like you said, do I care enough about the people who are being impacted, who are feeling the brunt of this, who are getting the short end of the stick? Do I care about them enough to change my practice? And really, if all I do is put the folks at the margin, at the center of what I do, what would I create, right? If I put
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
put my kids who are having the least amount of success at the center of my design, my curricular design, at the center of what supplemental curricular resources I bring in, what pedagogical moves I make, what relevant connections I make, what projects I bring in, if all I do is pick that student, those three students, and design for them, what would I create? And then what's the impact of that?
Mm.
Right? Does that shift some things, right? And then at some point, as I work with schools and leaders, they say like, okay, great. Okay, if I do that, there's a ceiling that I'm going to hit. There's a wall that I'm going to hit that's going to not allow me to do what I really want to do. Then I say like, good. Now we see the ceiling. You didn't see the ceiling before, maybe. You didn't acknowledge it. Okay, so then great. So while you're doing this stuff in the box, you got to figure out what you're going to do about the ceiling too. And you can't do that solo, right? So all of those kind of pieces, right, need to be at play. And right, and am I complicit in this whole situation, right? Because you can, it's like it's my boss's fault, it's the governor's fault, it's somebody's fault. Okay, great. What am I doing? And how complicit am I in this? And how willing am I to change what I am doing to have a different experience? And how do I know that it's working? Go ask that kid. Go ask that student who's not being served. Is this it? Does this work? Is this interesting to you? Is this how it should be? What do you think I should do? Dr. Emden talks all about cogents, right? That says you got to go ask that students. But let's be specific with which students. Let's not go ask the straight A students that are in the leadership program how we doing in school, guys. And they're like, it's great. Like, great. We're gonna keep doing the same thing then, right? Don't ask them. Go ask the kid that's on the block, that's in the streets, that's not coming. Ask them what it needs to be. They'll tell you the truth. Change for them. Ignore everybody else. That's harder to say. I'll say ignore the folks that it's working for. Go ask the people that it's not working for. Build around them. See what happens then. It change everything that gets in the way.
Now, people are going to hear that, and they're going to hear you say ignore, and there's going to be a little, what do you mean? We can't ignore certain students, sir. We can't ignore the ones that, you know, I'm going to use this, and I don't like using this term, so I want to preface it for those who don't know me. But like, we can't ignore our high flyers. We can't ignore, the students who we got to continue to push them, and we got to continue to make sure that we're doing those things. But you just said ignore. So somebody's going
In
to
the
listen
design.
There it is. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
In the design.
give us that distinction a little bit. When you say in the
Okay.
design, how does that change from people just hearing you say, "Oh, ignore those students"?
Because we have designed for students who are winning.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Every aspect of school is designed for that. We track for that, right? Our systems of kicking certain kids out is so that the kids that are staying in can have a certain experience. Everything is designed for students who are winning. Now, the problem with that is that the kids who are winning, there's a racial disproportionality with those kids who are winning and those kids who are losing in our education system, at least, right? So as we design and say, how do I want to structure my curriculum? Put somebody at the center. That's normally not at the center. Because normally, if you're like, that kid ain't even going to be here, I'm not going to keep them at the center. Put them at the center. Ask them. You don't got to put them at the center. Ask them. And design around them, or get out of the way and be like, boom, what do you think we should do? Let's do that. See what happens.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. I just want to see what happens.
And I think that's the part too, is because you ask questions of people when you believe they have something to say.
Yes.
You ask questions of people when
they matter. When they matter.
Yes, and that matter. Absolutely. Who we center as educators says a lot about what we believe about power, what we believe about who matters, what we believe about how we define success. Even as you were talking earlier about like that reflection piece and right asking the right questions. I think one of the things that came up for me is also knowing in and not just our K to 12 experience and how that was for us as well. But I think sometimes as educators, we don't necessarily do enough work, in my experience, with knowing our triggers and knowing like how we tick. And here's what I mean. I know right now in the school that I serve in that there are certain students who are known for certain actions. They're not going to a certain class. They're in the hallway. They are hyper visible. Their name gets called all the time. But then there are some other students who may not be as visible. They're kind of but they're doing exactly the same thing and are not seen. What does that say about why we see some kids and not others? Why some kids are labeled that way and not others? And I think some of it has to do with, how we've been socialized, what we're trained to see, some of our past situations and things that we need to be able to process through so we can be whole in our practice as educators. But and I want to turn it over to you, and then I want to also spend some time with the work that you're doing now, and get you to plug some of that stuff. But I want to ask, in that space, when we're talking about teachers, like, again, who's visible and who's not, who we're seeing for what, and who we're seeing, like, to put it out there, you know, uh, as plainly as I can, we see the push out of our an adultification of our black girls. We see the labeling, the othering, the diagnose or identification of them of our black boys in with IEPs and 504s and all the things that we do to try to that put them on that school to prison nexus that we talk about. Um, what advice? What what can we do with those who have been unplugging and looking to the left and the right, and they see others who are doing those things? What are some practical things we could do to kind of spur each other on to seeing, like, yo, this isn't working for them. We need to be doing something different.
I mean, I think one, we have to talk to them, right? Because we spend a lot of time either talking about them or someone tells us what we should or should not do about them, but not necessarily talking to them.
Yeah.
And we have one-on-one talks. That's one thing. I'm talking more so institutionally to say, what is their experience? What do they think about what's going on and what needs to happen, right? So we need to connect with them and then be willing to change that. That makes them more visible, right? I think the other piece is we have to wrestle with how okay we are with what the outcomes that we're getting, right? We're okay with certain kids doing certain things because we have a deficit model as it applies to some people. Black people, brown people, immigrant people, poor people, right? We could be in a school. I could be in a school and I see people in the hall. Like, who's in the hall? I see a bunch of white kids in the hall. I'm like, there's something a little strange about this, right? There's a voice in my mind that says, should white kids be in the hall? And it's like, well, why are they in the hall? Or maybe these are some poor kids, or maybe they live in a trailer park or something like that, or maybe they're bad. Then it's just like all these stories I'm telling my mind to justify
Yeah.
the outcomes that are happening, that all kind of say whether it should or shouldn't be happening. Ultimately, no one should be having that experience, and something should change, whether that's around support or the tier one experience that we're giving kids day to day, right? So
Yeah.
we have to battle, manage these models that we're holding, and be willing to change.
To the end of being willing to change, you got some things coming up. You're doing some amazing work with Trust Leadership. Could you kind of talk to us about how people could connect with your work? Talk to us about the things that are coming up, and just give us some time to just connect with your work and what you're doing.
Yeah. So definitely you can learn more at my website, Trust Leadership, TRUSS leadership.com. Same on Twitter. I think same on the other platforms too. Um, uh, what I'm excited about doing is getting past these one and done professional developments,
Yes, sir.
getting past this, 101 training to say what's deeper than that, to doing some year-long, multi-year work. I'm interested in the work that I'm doing with whole school districts around what's the whole district plan around this. What's the longevity plan? What's the sustainability plan? What are we doing for the leaders? What are we doing for the teachers? What are we doing for student leadership? Where's the racial affinity going on in the mix and all of that? How's it all fit? Who's sitting at the table of all that? How do we know if we're making progress or not? I'm interested in all those conversations and wherever I get to do the work, whether that's the left coast or the west coast, or maybe that's the same coast, the west coast or the east coast. Um, so I'm excited about that. I've been doing a lot of racial affinity work because our brown people need the space to know that we are not crazy, that we are loved, and we deserve greatness. But we also need the space to build our capacity in a place that we feel comfortable. And we also need to bring together our voices in solidarity to push for change, because 2020 came and went. Everybody's not still excited. We're still brown though. Okay. We
Yes,
still see it. We still experience. So therefore, we still got some ideas around what needs to happen. So we need to bring our voices together. So I love the combination of this advocacy work and this BIPOC healing space work combination. So I've been loving that. And I love the conference I get to do every year. This year I'm in the fourth annual of my Dismantling White Supremacy Culture in Schools conference. It's June 16th and 17th this year. 2 days virtual. Keynote hasn't been announced yet, but we're working on that. It's going to be a nice little surprise coming soon. But workshops, panels, all of that kind of stuff. There was an in-person option for folks in Portland. Now that I'm in the Portland, Oregon area. And I'm interested in getting active and connecting with folks that I first met years ago. And as I get to travel the country now and meet people now, and they tell me the work they've been doing the last couple of years. I love it, man, because like we need community to do this work because our kids need us to continue doing this work.
Yeah.
They can't allow for us to give up, right? So we need all the things that we need to continue, but also the structural stuff that changes, so that it's not us battling the monster all the time.
Man, I think I'm encouraged by that. I'm encouraged by the work you do. Like I said, you were one of the main. That moment stands out to me as one of the first times where I was like, as I'm unloading and unpacking, hearing somebody say, "No, you're not crazy. This is happening," and then not only that, but this is how we move forward. For me, those are really big and key things. My grandfather always told me, if you got problems and no solutions, you're just complaining. And so he always told me, like, I want you to be solutions oriented. I always want you to think through how you can solve the problems that you see. And I always gravitate to folks who do that, who are doing work. And even if it's not if it's not working, or if they're willing to try something, they're not willing to sit in something that isn't working. They are uncomfortable with what is and need something to change. Those are people I always gravitate to. And so I just want to honor you in this time, brother, and say thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for to keep that flame burning for others, pointing the way, spreading love and light, and doing those things to make outcomes better for all of us with marginalized identities that change the world for all those who would come in contact with it, man. I think, I just want to thank you and say that stuff is meaningful. It's impactful, and I'm wishing you nothing but success. That wishes nothing for us, but success for all of us. So thank you, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate you, and I'll end where I should have began. That this work didn't start with me.
Yeah.
Right. I was inspired by people who came before me, inspired by my mom who told it like it was. I was inspired by listening to people when I was younger, like Jeff Duncan Andrade, listening to people like Zaretta Hammond later on, and Patina Love, and Goldie, right? Listening to the words of Huey P. Newton, whether I saw a speech or I got to read Malcolm X. Like, I was inspired by that, by Bell Hooks, right? And really by the many generations that came before us, right? So like really we're just continuing that legacy, right? So I'll never pretend that the work started with me. I'm trying to continue and do justice to the folks who paved the way for us, and hopefully, make some room for more folks to get through to keep doing this work. So I appreciate you and everybody out there that's not crazy. You're saying this as they come, and you need to keep working and building and pushing, because our children deserve all those things. So I love any opportunity to talk and connect, and anytime I can just give some fuel to this fire that we got to keep burning. There's kids in these classes today and tomorrow, and they need the right stuff.
Absolutely. The notion of holding the door open for the person behind you is what comes to my mind as I think about that. Are we moving in a way that does that? And so, thank you for that reminder. And man, thank you for this time. I hope that others will connect with you at trustleadership.com and getting into your work and get into your conference, man, because those are meaningful times for us to huddle up, learn to play, so we can run to play. So thank you, brother. And thank you for this time.